이드고입니다. 감사합니다. 네, 이제 첫날 이제 페스티벌 컨퍼런스부터 시작을 하는데요. 저희가 아주 이제 귀중한 그 손님들을 모셨습니다. 그래서 지금 이제 첫 번째 연사는 이제 켈리 왈릭 씨고요. 이제 간단한 소개를 드리면은 사실 이제 인디 게임을 이제 보통 이제 저희가 생각을 하면은 게임을 만들어가지고 수익을 내가지고 뭐 이렇게 생존을 하든지 아니면 이제 큰 이제 이익을 얻든지 이런 식으로 이제 보통 많이 생각을 하는데 상당히 독특하게 이제 인디 게임을 이제 큐레이션하는 쪽으로 이제 자기가 인디 게임을 만드는 게 아니라 이런 쪽으로 생각을 하셔가지고 인디 메가부스라고 하는 아주 독특한 이런 이제 그 법인을 4년 전에 설립하셔가지고 지금은 전 세계 대부분의 모든 이제 그 메이저 게임 전시 행사에서 인디 게임들 모아가지고 지금 이제 크게 이제 성공을 달리고 있고요. 사실 이제 저도 이제 스피커 연사분들 섭외할 때 이제 좋은 이제 그 게임 디자인 하시는 분들 섭외하는데 이 모델이 되게 많이 흥미롭더라고요. 그래서 저도 개인적으로 상당히 많이 관심을 가지고 있고 어떻게 진행했는지를 한번 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 켈리 왈릭 씨를 소개해드리겠습니다. 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Alright, so thank you, and thank you everyone for coming this morning. It's really awesome to be invited to be able to give this talk for the first indie festival in Korea, so that's great. And the staff has been amazing, so great work everyone. This is really coming together, so I'm excited to see all the games and see how it's going. Alright, so I guess we'll get started here. I'm going to make sure I have a timer. Alright, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Indie Mega Booth, which is the company that I'm currently running. I'll go into this a little bit more, but also a bit about how to grow communities, which is something that I think seems like everybody here has been interested in, and a little bit about, I guess a little bit of like history and sort of business of indie games as far as I've been experiencing it. Alright, so who am I? Which is a sort of complicated question. But my name is Kelly Wallick. I have my email address here and Twitter, so if you want to send me a question. So this was me in my previous life, maybe about like 5-6 years ago. I started out as a chemistry major in college. I worked at a startup right out of school. I ended up not going into grad school. It was very expensive, so I figured that I would work at a startup. I worked at a startup for a little while, and then I moved to Boston, and I was working at MIT, managing a chemical engineering lab. And then due to a lab accident, which was not my fault at all, we started doing some research into biofuels, and then I was hired as a startup, working at a startup that made biofuels. So this was me in my, my fancy lab attire, missing the respirator and everything. So I was looking to start a biotech company, and at the time my sister wanted to start a video game company, which sounded pretty exciting. So I started going with her to meetups and learning more about game developers. I eventually got a job working as a project manager at a software company to learn more about how software is developed and how video games are made. I had really wanted to just sort of jump into it and start it, and I got some good advice that was you should really work in the industry that you want to start a company in for at least a year or two so you can get some experience, even though I was a little impatient about it. So, let's see how this works. There we go. So around that time then I started helping and volunteering at conferences with a local company in Boston. I was still there at the time, and we were at an event called PAX, which is the Penny Arcade Expo. They have multiple of them in a year now, but this was one in Seattle. And they had all the indie developers sort of spread all over the place, and you're up against people who have AAA budgets and lots of money, and games that are very well known, so it's hard to get traffic, but you're still spending a lot of time and money to go to these events. So someone had the idea that we should get a bunch of the companies and we should all work together and buy a space right in the middle of the show floor and put ourselves in front of all the AAA games, and then that way we would sort of be considered on par with them as well. So I really liked the idea, and I wanted to learn more about developers, and I like organizing things, so I thought that it would be a fun sort of way to learn more about how this all works. So the first time that we started it, we had 16 companies, and it was sort of a trial and error thing. The Mega Booth was just a descriptive, random name that we made up. Now it's something that's been with me for 4.5 years, I guess, at this point. And so after the first one, it was really successful and people were very excited about it. And it was one of the first times that we had sort of made a big splash in a large consumer event. So we were actually, I think, next to like a really big tree, like a 2-story tree, and there's like a thing with a dragon. And then sort of all of us just plopped in the middle with this like lo-fi, not very expensive looking area, but we still got people stopping and enjoying the games. So the next time that we ran it then, we had 32 teams that participated, because pretty much everyone that was in the first one recommended a friend to come to it. And then, let's see, this is 4 years later, so this is our picture from PAX Prime, which was just a few weeks ago. We had 70 plus teams. We have hundreds of people and developers. We have 30 or so volunteers that help us out. We have major press. We get lots of attention. And so this has grown from something that was just sort of a small idea to just help people get some extra attention into a whole sort of network and community of people. We also started moving into doing global events, so we've been doing shows in Europe. We did Gamescom, we're doing EGX this year. We co-organized Bit Summit, which is in Kyoto. That was just this past summer, coming out to meet people in places like Korea and all over the world to talk to them about how you can sort of help build your local community and grow something from it. We started off, it was just me running it in my spare time. I was volunteering outside of my job. And then 2 years ago, I quit my day job and I started it as a full-time company. And so right now we have one other full-time person that works with us, and then we have a handful of contractors and people that volunteer their time. So even though we have a small staff and we don't have a lot of funding, we still make a lot of things happen, mostly by bringing everybody together and having them work towards a common goal. So things have changed a lot in the last couple of years, so I want to talk a little bit about why we thought that it worked. And actually, you guys may recognize the very tall person in the middle there. There's also the very tall person over there. So 4 years ago, a lot of the consumer events were just only focused on AAA things. There were some indie events, but it was sort of like preaching to the choir. You were having the same people who already liked your game and already heard about your stuff coming to see your game that they already liked and enjoyed. So most of these consumer events for fans were filled with just AAA games. And when Penny Arcade started their conference, they wanted to give small development teams an opportunity to show at events like this. And like I said, the issue is sort of being able to get the attention onto them. There were things that were just starting to start out, like there were getting to be new distribution channels available to teams, so things like Steam and mobile and self-publishing and stuff like that. So you didn't have to go through these sort of like big traditional publishers anymore, like only go on console or just release on PC, to your friends and things like that. And these were becoming more popular and easier for indie developers to get attention on them. There's a lot of limited marketing budgets, which is still the case. And also one of the things that was happening at the time is that the community of indie developers was starting to grow, but it was also a bit fractured. So there were like mailing lists and local community groups, but they all sort of weren't communicating with each other or talking with each other to help them out. All right, so how did this influence indie games? So there's been sort of a lot of changes, I think, that have happened over the last couple of years that sort of we were in the middle of. We had started organizing this just slightly before a lot of things with the indie scene, I guess in general, started to take off. And like I was saying, we had there's starting to be easier access to distribution, but there's also easier access to tools like things like Unity are starting to get popular, and Twine. So it's becoming easier than ever to actually make games, and then it was becoming easier to actually distribute them as well. Around this time as well, there was a couple really big breakout hits and really good stories. You had things like Annie Chamber and Monaco and stuff like this that had really personable developers that had the story of having a single developer or a small team that launched games and made lots of money. And so people started to pay more attention to it. There's also renewed press interest. So we had a feature done on Polygon that was called Human Angle. And around the same time, there's a lot of articles coming out about the indie development scene and the idea of like, who are these people and what are they doing, and like the sort of artistic side of game development. Now it's, at the time, I guess it was semi-revolutionary to get a group, like huge group of people to work together towards this common goal to help each other instead of always fighting for attention for yourself. Now this is very common. I get people emailing me all the time and asking me questions about how to do something similar, which I think is amazing. It's a great idea to band together small groups of people to do something really big. It takes a lot of making sure that everybody is on the same page and wanting to help each other out, which I think is pretty common in the indie game development scene. One of the things that I think has helped a lot too with the MegaBoost influence is that for platform holders and publishers, they can now talk to like one person or a small group of people, and we can help them distribute out information to a large team, like large groups of teams. And so it's not as difficult for, say, someone like Sony or Microsoft or something like that to find a bunch of indie games and talk to hundreds of developers. They can work with us directly, and we can help them to do that, and we can also help the developers communicate with them in a way that is easy and isn't scary and sort of makes sense for them. The other thing that we started to do is we provide a lot of networks aside from just the event, so the developers meet each other. We have a mailing list like leading up to the event, and so the developers can all talk to each other and ask questions, but then they also form relationships where they meet new people that they want to work with, they meet professional contacts, and then after the events, they can all communicate with each other and ask each other sort of business-related questions. And so it goes from like very low level of like, where do I buy t-shirts so that I can sell them? You know, how do I go to a conference? All the way to like, oh, I have a publisher deal and they're offering me X% and I'm not sure if they're gonna like fully follow through on the marketing. What do you think about this? So all of these things have sort of culminated over the last couple of years now to grow a community of people who are hopefully more business savvy, a little better at showing at events, understanding marketing, understanding what the state of the actual industry is, so that they're going into it and they're having a better understanding. Okay. So, like I said, a lot of things have changed at the time. One of the big issues initially was just getting visibility for indie games in general. It was sort of talked about. I mean, obviously, indie games are not a new thing as far as, you know, when we started 4 years ago. This is something that's been going on. But a lot has changed since that time. And so it was more like, how many indie developers can we get together? How can we show the public that this is a thing, that the games are just as good as anything that's coming out from AAA? You know, it's good to support people who are doing creative work. And now that sort of turned into this boom of, now there's so many indie games that the question has become, what are the best indie games, or what are the indie games that people should be taking a look at, or what are the games and companies that are contributing to the community? So it's gone from sort of a visibility issue to more of a discoverability issue for games, which has changed a lot of how we have to sort of deal with things. So when we first started the MegaBooth, things like Steam for PC distribution were very tightly curated. So the idea of like a walled garden. This is before Greenlight and before you could sort of like totally self-publish on these. And so then something like that opens up, and then all of a sudden it's great because you have more and more people that can put their games out on PC. But now you have, I think it's like, what, like 100 games a day or something come out on Steam, which is better than the App Store, which is like 1,000 games a day or something ridiculous. Which, you know, it was sort of happening at the time, but this has just grown and grown and grown. As I had mentioned before, it was a low visibility for indie game developers versus now where the term indie developers, at least in the West, is very common, and it's something that sort of people understand what it is and they understand what it means. So it's not, like I said, it's not so much that we have to tell people what indie games are. It's more that we have this visibility now. We have people paying attention to what indie games are. So what do you do with all that attention? So small numbers versus large communities. You know, there used to be communities where people are like, there's only 3 of us. I don't know how to find everybody. And now there's tons of resources. You have things like the, you know, IGDA chapters and stuff like that. And you have people communicating globally to help each other to grow these communities. So hopefully, ideally, people are not sort of feeling so alone in the situation anymore. Another thing was limited platforms versus lots and lots of options. I mean, you have things like now you have VR, you have like multiple kinds of mobile things, you have consoles, you have self-publishing, you have all these sort of things. So where it used to be very simple of like, oh, I do PC or I do console, and then it became like PC, console, mobile, and then it's PC, console, mobile, VR, television, whatever else, projector systems. That you can put your games on, which again is great, but then it's also where a consumer is looking and understanding a lot more of what your audience is, as opposed to trying to like reach an entire general audience, say publishing on a large console. Another really big change actually was the sort of rise of Kickstarter around that time. When I was first starting the Mega Booth, I was thinking about this, like using Kickstarter as a way to fund games, and talked to someone about it who's in the industry at the time, and he thought it was like ridiculous because why would anybody ever fund games on Kickstarter? And then I think FTL happened like shortly after that, and then it became very common to do crowdfunding. So now all of a sudden you're opening up access to funds as well. So you don't have to just go to a publisher, you don't have to just have the money saved up or set aside. Now all of a sudden you can go directly to your audience and say, hey, I have this cool idea for a game, can you guys give me the money to make it? Which turns it a little bit sort of into like a Patreon of the Arts style funding, but it also sort of opened floodgates in that sense where you have lots of people then getting funding to make lots of different games that they wouldn't have been able to have access to the money to before. Another sort of thing too is how much it's changed for social media, so Twitter and Facebook and being able to grow communities on there. At the time, I mean, Twitter was something that was sort of, there were still articles coming out like, oh, what is this thing, and are people going to be using it in the future? And now for a lot of developers and a lot of people, that's the way that they communicate with their audience directly. And you can have direct social interaction with your fans, with developers maybe that you want to ask questions to. And so now there's all these sort of ways to help you grow your communities that weren't really available at the time. So I get this question a lot, which is what are we looking for games for the Mega Booth? So I thought that I would talk about this a little bit as well. So if you're interested, I put a link down at the bottom there. I actually wrote a really in-depth blog post. I'm pretty wordy when I write, so it's a little lengthy, so sorry. But it's 4 parts. It goes through essentially every step of the process, like the history of the technical part of it, the back-end system that we use, the sort of whole 9 yards. But I just figured I'd go over a little bit of an overview on it. When we had first started, it was very informal. It was just whoever we could convince to actually participate in it. And then it became just personal recommendations from the people that we had worked with before. And then it became, friends of a friend of a friend of a friend. And then it started getting to be where I wasn't sure of the quality level of the games. We were sometimes getting really big publishers that were sort of like trying to sneak in and put their games in there and like call it indie. So we started doing a formal submission process. And through a series of things that I describe in very much detail in my blog post, we ended up having to get a better technical system to be able to take care of like going through all of these games. But the sort of outline here is generally what we were looking for. So we say that we're looking for like a unique mechanic, visual style, or a concept for the game, and something that represents an underrepresented game or idea. And so basically what that means is it needs to be an interesting game. It should be doing something that people haven't been doing before. We sort of have a case where like we see trends in games maybe 6 or 8 months before they start to come out to the public, because we hold our submissions twice a year. And so it can always tell, like, 1 year of space is like the really cool thing. We get 20 games that are based in space, and then, if like zombies are the cool thing, we get 20 games that are having zombies in them. Or endless runners, sometimes they're cool, like we'll get a whole handful of endless runners. And what that means, and this also sort of spreads out into the rest of when you go to launch your game, is that if we're looking at 20 endless runners, your endless runner has to be the coolest one out of all of these endless runners. Which is the same type of competition that you're going to see in the marketplace anyways. And so I think paying attention to these things and doing something that's a little slightly different or a little slightly ahead of the curve can really make your game stand out in a lot of ways that you might not realize. Another really very important part is that we research the companies pretty deeply. So we look at people's Facebook pages, we go through Twitter accounts, we look back at blog posts and things like that. Because first off, we're working with a large group of people, so there's the saying, if you spend 90% of your time managing 10% of the people, then that becomes a problem. So we have to make sure that the teams that we're working with, first off, act in a semi-professional manner, that they can at least work together in a large group. But also we don't want to be bringing people in that are sort of, I guess, spreading negativity or being competitive with everyone else, or however you want to call it, because the idea of it is that everybody has to work together to do something positive for the community. So if they're not on board with that idea, the whole concept doesn't work. So I think that this is like a very important thing when you're doing community building, is that to take a look at, even if the game is amazing, if the people on the team that are making it are difficult to work with, or you don't think that they're doing something positive for the community overall, maybe think about those kinds of things. And that even goes for just regular business deals as well. I mean, I know that's an idealistic way to look at it, but I feel pretty strongly about it. We also look to see if the team would benefit from the work, or from the sort of community that we built. So a lot of times, like student games or games that are made by newer developers, even if they're not the most amazing game, if we think that they would benefit from the mentorship from the older developers or from meeting new business contacts, we also take that into consideration as well. So we actually had a game that was called The Whole Story, which was made by like 5 12-year-old girls. And the game was, okay, it's a good game, but it definitely is not quite on par with like the level of games that we normally show. But we want to encourage women to be entering into technology. We want to inspire young students to be able to go back to their classmates and tell them about this great experience that they had. And from that, they are actually showing at other events. They have funding, they've been getting a lot of press, and this is doing something good for the game development scene overall. So we take things like that into consideration as well. Ooh, what does the future hold? I'm not sure. So as we're sort of growing, and like I said, all of these things that have changed over the last however many years that we've been doing this, the sort of goal of what we're doing has been shifting. So now, how do we take all this and how do we address the issues that are happening in the indie scene now? Like, how do we help games get discovered? How do we help people get access to funding, or at least reach the audience that they need to reach? One of the things that I've been reading a lot about recently is how other entertainment industries have been dealing with the influx of self-publishing. The music industry is a really good example of it. And something that's interesting is that there's not as many sort of large hits at the top anymore. A lot of it is very niche audiences, but large volumes of niche audiences. So sort of what that means is that if you're making a game that is only going to appeal to like a small subset of people, that's fine. You just need to identify who they are and find them and get your game to them specifically. So if you're looking for people, like if your game is very artsy, then that's fine. Market it as an artsy game, get it to people who like artsy stuff, and then sell it to them directly. Because trying to take your artsy game and sell it to people who only want to play Call of Duty isn't going to get you anywhere. And there is possibility and ways to do this, but one of the important things is just sort of identifying that very early on. So one of the things that we want to do is I want to help to grow our business relationships so that we can help to address these issues with the companies that we work with, so like platform holders and publishers and funding outlets and things like that. Like how do we work with these companies to help to address what's going on in the indie scene? Another thing is doing outreach into global communities, because I think that the stronger the communities are and the more people communicate with each other, the more you find like, oh, the mobile market is really big here, or, oh, PC's really big here, but this doesn't work here, but this totally worked here. And then you sort of find all these different ideas. There's a like sort of famous chemistry thing where MRIs, like when you go to a doctor and they do a bone scan, was actually discovered by a chemist, I think like 20 years or 30 years or something before it was used in medicine. And there wasn't any communication between medical field and the chemistry field. And so one day, I think it was like Friends or something, a doctor had gotten wind of the kind of work that this chemist was doing, and they're like, that's amazing, we could use that in medicine. And so it's never used in chemistry anymore, like it didn't really have any application, but it's something that it, like, helped to revolutionize medicine. And so if you sort of think of like talking to people outside of your field, talking to people in other communities, talking to people with different experiences than yourself, you can pull little pieces of information and do something for yourself with it in a way that they might not have thought of. So we're working on working with new events, co-organizing events, starting to sort of expand outside of just existing with inside somebody else's larger event. I guess parasite is the wrong word. Symbiotic relationship with the consumer events that we've been working with. But I also sort of want to grow outside of that because we don't want to get stuck and be doing the same thing over and over. I think another important thing is reaching alternative media, new outlets, which is another thing that's changed, like streaming, Twitch and now YouTube. That's really changed another way that developers can directly reach their fans. And the idea of having like a commercial on TV is almost not as useful as having like a Twitch streamer play your game or having PewDiePie even like say something about your game. So sort of keeping on track with how these things are growing and working with the companies early on to say, hey, you should have a focus on this diverse content because not everybody wants to watch the same like esports games over and over and over again. There's channels for that and there are people that do that, but to put some variety into it and sort of help to grow the ecosystem early on. I'd like to provide better developer support networks, which I think we do that pretty well, but it's also, like I said, I think it's a very important part because indie companies don't have the infrastructure that large companies have. You don't have an HR department, lawyers, or I don't know how many you do. But you can sort of help to fill in the gaps by having the community support and your friends and family and these networks that can help to support you in ways that you might not be able to do yourself. Oh, sorry, I messed up my slide there. Another thing, this is a sort of weird business boring term thing, but the idea of B2B or B2C. So B2B is business to business and B2C is business to consumer, which the first time someone told me that and I figured out what it was, I was like, well, there we go. Because I would assume, for the Mega Booth that we want to reach fans of video games. And so I was going to, grow up our website and put stuff on there that would draw in people who like to play video games. And someone had said this to me, like, oh, I thought you were B2B, which means that we mostly primarily talk to and market to and work with other developers, which knowing that has helped a lot. And so if you go to our website, it's actually a lot of developers write articles for us. We have information on there that's useful for talking with developers and not so much for talking directly to fans. But to help with the discoverability issue now is something that we really want to start pushing, like, to people who actually like video games. Like, oh, if I see that it's an indie Mega Booth game, then I know that it has a certain quality level or is at a certain bar level, because then in the long run, that'll make us be able to help good games get discovered by more fans. So that's something that we're currently working on. So figured I'd talk a little bit about the IGF and expanding my role outside of the Indie Mega Booth. So the IGF is the Independent Games Festival, which is held every year in San Francisco. It's part of GDC, which is the Game Developers Conference. And so I was approached by Brandon, who is the previous IGF chairman, about taking over the position, which is finally now public, so I can actually talk about it. And the thing with the IGF is that there's not many people that are sort of in the role that the two of us are in, where we sort of know what's going on in the industry and we know everybody and we know all the games, but I'm not beholden to anyone. I don't have to sell a certain game. I'm not associated with a publisher. The company is fully owned by ourselves. We don't have investors or any of that kind of stuff. And so what this does is it expands something similar that we're doing with the Mega Booth into more professional and industry setting. So I just figured I would talk a little bit about what I wanted to do with that role for the community in general, since I want to sort of take what we do with the Mega Booth and apply it into industry setting. So as I was saying before, one of the things that's very important to us is working with teams that are doing something positive for the community, promoting good work and growing local communities and things like that. So this is something that I really want to take those values and apply them to the IGF. Like, I want the industry as a whole to recognize that it's the games and the companies and the people behind them and the whole sort of like ecosystem that's very important. And even though obviously the games are important, we should be helping to promote people that are doing really good things for each other. One of the things that I'd like to also do is to learn from industry leaders and influential companies and take what they think about the indie development scene and take that and apply that into the mega booth. So the way that games are selected for IGF is that it's all industry-based. And so all leaders of the industry sort of debate what games mean, I guess, like what the indie scene is, and sort of taking all of these valuable opinions from people who are deep into the industry and taking them and helping that to sort of push it into like a consumer situation is something that I'm excited about. Also, I like to facilitate industry conversations and about issues about facing indie developers in a way that, I keep saying promote positivity, but I think it's important instead of sort of yelling at each other on Twitter or things like that, or arguing with people about what games are, what these things mean, is being able to have an opportunity where I can help to lead these conversations in a way that I think will be more productive. And also how we talk about sustaining the indie development scene, because right now I think that there's a lot of questions about how do we get our games discovered, how do we make money, where does it come from, who's buying our games, what do we do with this, and it can feel a little uncertain. And so I think that talking about that in a way that's reasonable, instead of just only talking about people who've done super well or people that are failing at the bottom, is what are all the people doing in the middle, because that's where 99% of people who are making games are going to be ending up. So that's the end of my talk, and I figured to do a little bit of a Q&A. So thank you everyone for listening to me ramble.
네, 지금까지 이제 켈리 씨의 이제 발표가 이제 마쳤는데요. 자, 질문 있으신 분들은 질문을 주시면요, 저희 이제 통역이 도와드릴 테니까요, 편하게 한글로 질문해 주셔도 좋습니다. 질문 있으십니까?
No one?
예.
예, 그냥 편하게 한국말로 하겠습니다. 발표 잘 들었고요. 예, 참 의미 있는 일을 하고 있는 것 같습니다. 제가 이제 궁금한 거는 이제 인디 게임 개발사들한테 여러 가지 좋은 일들을 하고 계신 것 같은데, 인디 게임 개발사들이 아까 이제 셀프 퍼블
해주세요.
예, 다시 처음부터 할까요?
네, 한번 해봐요.
예, 발표 재미있게 잘 들었고요. 그 인디 게임 개발사들한테 참 좋은 일들을 많이 하고 있는 것 같습니다. 예. 한국에서도 요즘 이제 게임사들 보면 어려운 것 중에 하나가 이제 게임을 이제 퍼블싱하고 그것들을 이제 게임 유저들한테 노출시키는 게 참 어려운 것 같아요. 예, 그런 것들을 이제 많이 도와주시는 것 같은데, 그럼에도 불구하고 좀 더 이렇게 인디 게임들이 좀 더 많은 사람들한테 알리게 하기 위해 아마 더 많은 시도들을 할 것 같은데, 앞으로는 어떤 것들을 또 고민하고 있고 할 것인지 그런 것들이 좀 궁금합니다.
Right, thank you. So I'll repeat the question a little bit before I answer. And so you're saying that in Korea it's difficult for publishing and also to reach the audience that you want to reach. I'm assuming that you're talking about reaching an audience in Korea or potentially maybe a global audience. So I think one of the ways that's important for that is what I was talking about, where we have relationships with platform holders and publishers and press and people like that, is doing events like this where you can get sponsors here, you can get platform holders here, you can get publishers here. You can start to talk with them directly and have community leaders work with them on ways that can help to benefit the Korean game community, because all of them are different and the publishers might not know what the challenges are, they might not know totally what the market is like, but hearing it directly from developers can help with that. Also showing to big companies like the sponsors and publishers the types of games that are working or that are being made in the community, showing them stuff that they might not have heard of before can sort of inspire them to go back and say, hey, there's some really cool stuff coming out of Korea, there's some really cool things happening here, they're starting to organize their community, which will be easier for them to work with. I think we'll be able to help with that. Outside of just that, I think, directly publishing games via the market that you think is going to work the best and trying to work with just them directly. I know the mobile market here is pretty big, and I think Google Play is one of the main sponsors for here. So even if you can't pull in a large audience, trying to get an introduction just via the networks of the people that you already know to somebody that you can talk to, or even just asking from experiences from other developers who have been successful on the platform that you're hoping to target, can help to give you some insight to hopefully be more successful and reach the people that you're trying to reach. Thank you. Any other questions?
Sorry.
Yeah,
so a lot of indies start putting their games on the social media and advertise their games after they actually release it. What do you think is like an optimal level into the design process when people should start pushing their games on Facebook and start showing it to people while it's not still ready, but what's that level where you should start showing your development to people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when in the development process should you start marketing, basically? So I think that sort of depends on what the game is. For most indie developers, you sort of should always be on your soapbox and always talking about it and always trying to grow a community. And so the idea of sort of holding a game dear because you're either afraid of putting it out to people or you think like, it's so great that once you unleash it on the world, everyone is going to know about it, can sometimes be, I think, a downfall for indie developers. I mean, not that cloning isn't an issue or anything like that, but really, like, if this is going to be your game, you need to start growing a community, and you need to start getting out there, and your voice is a very tiny voice in a very large pool of people. Another good way to look at other certain things is we had the same question for people that were like, when should we apply to the mega booth? PAX currently has about, I think, 80,000 or 100,000 people come to the conference. So really, when you want 80,000 people to see your game is when you should be applying to the mega booth. The same sort of goes for talking about it on Twitter or Facebook. When you're ready for that audience to actually see what you're doing, then that's when you should start to put it out there. If it's a game that focuses on building a community, it should be basically as soon as possible. If it's something that there's sort of like a big surprise or reveal, you can just sort of tease it and do that like a little early on. But basically early and often, I think is probably my advice for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
What is your definition about great game?
I actually had a slide called that and I deleted it. It was called What Makes a Game Successful, because it's definitely a very complicated question. I think something that makes a game, that makes a game successful in the context of what the mega booth is looking for, is something where the team is taking an idea and executing on it in a way that we haven't seen before, or in a way that is doing something really innovative or unique. But also on top of that, I think a lot of people say when you're successful or when good things happen, you're lucky, which I think that luck is sort of a combination of working really hard and understanding what the right opportunities are and what opportunities you should be putting your time and your effort into. So the more you work and the longer you do something, the easier it is for you to identify what a good opportunity is, which I think sort of ends up translating into being lucky with a game. So the games that end up being really good or being really successful have combinations of being a good game. The trick is to make a good game. And then you have your good game, but you also understand how to use the opportunities that you get with the game that you've made, or with the community and the networks that you've built. The sort of key to success of making millions and millions of dollars, I'll go back to the example of Anti-Chamber. Alex Bruce gave a talk at GDC about, I guess, how Anti-Chamber became successful, and it was really, really, really difficult and a lot of work and at a lot of personal cost. So even if there is a sort of formula, it might not actually be what you want to do with your life or what you want at the end of it. Making things like Minecraft, that's a sort of like lightning bolt situation. And so being able to define also what you consider successful or what you consider good can be important. Like, is my game good because it reaches the audience I want to reach? Is it inspiring people? Is it helping someone? Is it selling 1 million copies? Is it, I don't know, getting a certain press person to talk about it? Is it getting your favorite developer in the world to think that your game is great? And so taking that and defining it, and then applying it to your game or to someone else's game, I think is what makes a game good or successful. That's a good question.
자, 그럼 마지막 질문 한 가지만 더 받도록 하겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 저 버프 스튜디오의 김도영이라고 하는데요. 인디 게임이 런칭을 했을 때 가장 많이 하는 곳이 이제 스팀이라고 알고 있는데, 저희 그 버프나이트 어드밴스드라는 게임을 가지고 저번 주에 스팀에 런칭을 했거든요. 근데 이제 하루 정도만 반짝 팔리고 그 다음 달부터는 다운로드 수가 급감을 했는데, 예전과는 달리 요즘에는 이제 레드오션이 너무 돼가는 것 같은데, 인디 게임들도 너무 많이 나오다 보니까 이제 새롭게 그 스팀에 인디 게임을 런칭을 하는 개발사들한테 어떻게 그런 어떤 문제점들을 좀 더 많이 팔릴 수 있게 그런 것들을 할 수 있는지 어떤 조언을 해주실 수 있다면 어떤 게 있을까요?
Okay, thank you for the question. So a sort of brief summary on that was they recently launched a game on Steam because that's where a lot of indie players are. And it was popular for one day and then the sales dropped off. And so your question is how for developers like you, or what advice do I have to help you to sell your game better on platforms like Steam? So that is the $1 million question. Which is one of the things that I was saying with the discoverability issues, is how do we address that? Because when Steam was the walled garden, the people that were on the outside of it were frustrated that they couldn't get in, and now that all the people that were on the outside of it that are in have sort of inadvertently flooded the market with a whole bunch of other stuff, which makes it hard then for any games to rise sort of above that. I mean, even getting features through Steam at this point, or through Valve, or I've even heard that with iOS or Android, can always not even guarantee sales the way that it used to. So there's developers that have been making use of early access, which also helps to grow your community, which is a large part of it, because you really shouldn't, I think, look at it as if you're marketing to the entire Steam audience, because not everyone is interested in it, or it might get lost in the shuffle. And so growing your community prior to when you launch the game to help to get those people to promote the game for you. Also growing your developer network so that they can help promote the game when you launch it as well can help. I've heard things like doing bundle sales and participating in like Steam sales, like the summer sale and stuff like that, will boost people's sales after their initial, like a lot of, or at least traditionally a lot of games, their initial sales spike is normally not nearly as high as what their subsequent sale spikes are. So maybe your initial launch is like this, and then if you're in a sale, and if you're in a bundle, and then if you're in this, then you sort of like go like this with your sales. With the game already being out, I mean, you can always try to relaunch it or remarket it, or just sort of call it and start on something new. I think that this is something that is probably like the biggest issue facing indie games now, is that you put all this time and effort into making your game and you launch it, and then no one knows about it even though you were marketing it for ages. There's an article on Gamasutra about a game called Airscape, which had a similar issue where they had hired like a marketing firm. They had been shown in the mega booth, they had been selected for different awards, and I think they sold 150 copies of their game. And so what do you do in that situation? They're young, and they're like, thankfully we weren't banking on this like making us money to keep sustaining ourselves. So I mean, I guess read through that and see if they had any good advice on it, but right now it's a very tough situation. So I don't know if that's actually good advice, more so than commiserating with you.
네, 그러면은 시간 관계상 여기서 이제 모든 세션을 마치도록 하고요. 네, 이제 10분 쉬었다가 저희가 이제 다음 세션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 지금까지 Q&A 수고해주신 켈리와 왈릭 씨에게 한 번 더 박수 큰 부탁드리겠습니다.
you.